With his bullet he would strike the head of a nail at the distance of many yards. No Indian hunter or warrior could with more sagacity trace his steps through the pathless forest, detecting the footsteps of a retreating foe, or search out the hiding place of the panther or the bear. In these hunting excursions the youthful frame of Daniel became inured to privation, hardship, endurance. Taught to rely upon his own resources, he knew not what it was to be lonely for an hour. In the darkest night and in the remotest wilderness, when the storm raged most fiercely, although but a child, he felt peaceful, happy, and entirely at home. About the year 1748, the date is somewhat uncertain, Squire Boone, with his family, emigrated 700 miles farther south and west to a place called Holman's Ford on the Yadkin River in North Carolina. The Yadkin is a small stream in the northwest part of the state. 100 years ago this was indeed a howling wilderness. It is difficult to imagine what could have induced the father of a family to abandon the comparatively safe and prosperous settlements on the bank of the Delaware, to plunge into the wilderness of these pathless solitudes several hundred miles from the Atlantic coast. Daniel was then about 16 years of age. Of the incidents of their long journey through the wood, on foot, with possibly a few pack horses, for there were no wagon roads whatever, we have no record. The journey must probably have occupied several weeks, occasionally cheered by sunshine, and again drenched by storms. There were 9 children in the family. At the close of the weary pilgrimage of a day, through such narrow trails as which the Indian or the buffalo had made through the forest or over the prairies, they were compelled to build a cabin at night, with logs and the bark of trees to shelter them from the wind and rain, and at the camp fire to cook the game which they had shot during the day. We can imagine that this journey must have been a season of unspeakable delight to Daniel Boone. Alike at home with the rifle and the hatchet, never for a moment bewildered or losing his self-possession, he could, even unaided at any hour, rear a sheltering hut for his mother and his sisters, before which the camp fire would blaze cheerily, and their hunger would be appeased by the choicest viands from the game which his rifle had procured. The spirit of adventure is so strong in most human hearts, which luxurious indulgence has not enervated, that it is not improbable that this family enjoyed far more in this romantic excursion through an unexplored wilderness than those now enjoy who in a few hours traverse the same distance in the smooth rolling rail cars. Indeed, fancy can paint many scenes of picturesque beauty which we know that the reality must have surpassed. It is the close of a lovely day. A gentle breeze sweeps through the tree tops from the northwest. The trail, through the day, has led along the banks of a crystal mountain stream sparkling with trout. The path is smooth for the moccasined feet. The limbs, inured to action, experienced no weariness. The axes of the father and the sons speedily construct a camp, open to the south, and perfectly sheltered on the roof and on the sides by the bark of trees. The busy fingers of the daughters have in the meantime spread over the floor a soft and fragrant carpet of evergreen twigs. The mother is preparing supper, of trout from the stream, and the fattest of wild turkeys or partridges, or tender cuts of venison, which the rifles of her husband or sons have procured. Voracious appetites render the repast far more palatable than the choicest viands which were ever spread in the banqueting halls of Versailles or Windsor. Waterfowl of gorgeous plumage sport in the stream, unintimidated by the approach of man. The plaintive songs of the forest birds float in the evening air. On the opposite side of the stream herds of deer and buffalo crop the rich herbage of the prairie, which extends far away, till it is lost in the horizon of the south. Daniel retires from the converse of the cabin to an adjoining eminence, where silently and rapturously he gazes upon the scene of loveliness spread out before him. Such incidents must have often occurred. Even in the dark and tempestuous night, with the storm surging through the tree tops, and the rain descending in floods, in their sheltered camp, illumined by the flames of their night fire, Souls capable of appreciating the sublimity of such scenes must have experienced exquisite delight. It is pleasant to reflect that the poor man in his humble cabin may often be the recipient of much more happiness than the lord finds in his castle, or the king in his palace. No details are given respecting the arrival of this family on the banks of the Yadkin, or of their habits of life while there. We simply know that they were far away in the untrodden wilderness, in the remotest frontiers of civilization. Bands of Indians were roving around them, but even if hostile, so long as they had only bows and arrows, the settler in his log hut, which was a fortress, and with his death-dealing rifle, was comparatively safe. Here the family dwelt for several years, probably in the enjoyment of abundance, and with ever-increasing comforts. The virgin soil, even poorly tilled, furnished them with the corn and vegetables they required, while the forests supplied the table with game. Thus the family, occupying the double position of the farmer and the hunter, lived in the enjoyment of all the luxuries which both of those callings could afford. Here Daniel Boone grew up to manhood. His love of solitude and of nature led him on long hunting excursions, from which he often returned laden with furs. The silence of the wilderness he brought back with him to his home. And though his placid features ever bore a smile, he had but few words to interchange with neighbors or friends. He was a man of affectionate but not of passionate nature. It would seem that other emigrants were lured to the banks of the Yadkin, for here, after a few years, young Boone fell in love with the daughter of his father's neighbor, and that daughter, Rebecca Bryan, became his bride. He thus left his father's home, and with his axe speedily erected for himself and wife a cabin, we may presume at some distance from sight or sound of any other house. There, from noise and tumult far, Daniel Boone established himself in the life of solitude to which he was accustomed and which he enjoyed. It appears that his marriage took place about the year 1755. The tide of immigration was still flowing in an uninterrupted stream towards the west. The population was increasing throughout this remote region, and the axe of the settler began to be heard on the streams tributary to the Yadkin. Daniel Boone became restless. He loved the wilderness and its solitude, and was annoyed by the approach of human habitations, bringing to him customs with which he was unacquainted, and exposing him to embarrassments from which he would gladly escape. The mode of life practiced by those early settlers in the wilderness is well known. The log house usually consisted of but one room, with a fireplace of stones at the end. These houses were often very warm and comfortable, presenting in the interior, with a bright blazing on the hearth, a very cheerful aspect. Their construction was usually as follows: straight smooth logs about a foot in diameter, cut of the proper length, and so notched at the ends as to be held very firmly together, were thus placed one above the other to the height of about 10 feet. The interstices were filled with clay, which soon hardened, rendering the walls comparatively smooth, and alike impervious to wind or rain. Other logs of straight fibre were split into clapboards, 1 or 2 inches in thickness, with which they covered the roof. If suitable wood for this purpose could not be found, the bark of trees was used, with an occasional thatching of the long grass of the prairies. Logs about 18 inches in diameter were selected for the floor. These were easily split in halves, and with the convex side buried in the earth, and the smooth surface uppermost joined closely together by a slight trimming with axe or adze, presented a very firm and even attractive surface for the feet. In the center of the room 4 auger holes were bored in the logs, about 3 inches in diameter. Stakes were driven firmly into these holes, upon which were placed 2 pieces of timber, with the upper surfaces hewn smooth, thus constructing a table. In one corner of the cabin 4 stakes were driven in a similar way, about 18 inches high, with forked tops. Upon these 2 saplings were laid with smooth pieces of bark stretched across. These were covered with grass or dried leaves, upon which was placed, with the fur upwards, the well-tanned skin of the buffalo or the bear. Thus quite a luxurious bed was constructed, upon which there was often